Genesis chapter 33. It's good to be back home. Good to be back with the brethren here. I appreciate the time off. We got to visit some people that we haven't seen in a very long time. And so it's good to be back with our home congregation. If you do not have the Abraham's family tree handout, please raise your hand. And Josh will get you a copy of that. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Donnie if he would direct our thoughts in a word of prayer, please. Amen. This family tree traces the descendants of Abraham. Of course, we're introduced to Abraham in the latter part of Genesis chapter 11, and then in chapter 12, the following passages after that deal with Abraham being called out of the Ur of the Chaldees. Of course, the genealogy of Abraham goes all the way back to Shem, the son of Noah, and then all the way back to Adam, of course, before the flood. And so you see here the men in the lineage, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and also their wives. And as you look at the legend that's at the bottom of the family tree, the concubines. The concubines were like a second-class wife, kind of a handmaiden type, and through them some children of Abraham came. So you can see there the descendants there of Abraham going all the way up until the 12 tribes that are produced through Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Now, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 33, and we're going to kind of just go back to verse 1, because it's been such a long time since we have looked at Genesis, and we're going to see here Jacob finally is meeting up with Esau. Now, is Jacob looking forward to this? No. How long has it been since he has seen Esau? About 20 years. He has, of course, he knows that he caused problems with Esau in stealing what? The birthright. He, through trickery, tricked his father Isaac and received the blessing of the birthright. And as a result of that, that caused Esau to be very bitter towards Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Now, Esau was kind of a conservative guy, right? He was kind of low-key, or... Right. Right. But there was a blessing that was going to come through that birthright, and also possessions. So it wasn't just the title of the birthright. Also, it meant when Isaac died, who would be the head of the clan, so to speak. So there was power involved. There was the Abrahamic blessing involved, and there were blessings that were involved that the firstborn would receive that the other children wouldn't receive. They would get a bigger portion. So there was a lot of things that were involved. And so there was that bitterness at the very beginning when Jacob did steal the birthright. Now, as I said before, Esau, he was conservative, right? Kind of low-key type of fella. Or was he something else? Robust. He was a man of the land. He was an outdoorsman, a rugged individual. And Jacob was pretty concerned about meeting up with him, knowing what had happened years ago. Chapter 33 and verse 1, Then Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maidens. Now remember what had happened in chapter 32. He was going to divide his family, the clan, so to speak. Because he says if Esau attacks, he'll just attack one part or one half of the clan, and others will survive. So he's already planning a strategy of escape for his people. And so he sees him far off, chapter 33 and verse 1. So he'd made the division there in verse 1. He put his maidens and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Verse 3. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Now, bowing down is significant in and of itself. That shows humility. But 7 times shows a great deal of humility. In fact, some documents have been uncovered in archaeological digs in that region, which shows that around that time, if you greet someone and you bow before them 7 times, you're showing a great amount of humility before that individual. You're saying to that individual that basically you are a great person and you're worthy of total submission. So it's significant that he bows 7 times to the ground in verse 3 until he came near his brother. Verse 4, then Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. What a relief that must have been to Jacob. I mean, I just, you can speculate all day long, but you can think, what was Jacob thinking when he saw Esau running towards him? Is he about to, knife me? Are we going to go at it right here? And so when Esau embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept together, that shows a great deal of relief and a sense of reconciliation. And so the time there, the time period, seems to heal those wounds that were caused so many years ago. And Esau was willing to let bygones be bygones, and so they embraced one another, and they wept together. Verse 5, he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, who are these with you? So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. So here you have Esau asking, who are all these with you? And Jacob is responding that these are the children that God has given to your servant. Notice how he refers to himself, your servant. Jacob is saying, I am your servant. That attitude of humility and submission that he has towards Esau. And so here Jacob is acknowledging that children are from the Lord. Psalm 127 and verse 3 speaks of children being a heritage of the Lord, or a gift from the Lord. So children are a gift given by God to parents. And parents have a responsibility of raising those children in the way of the Lord. So he acknowledges that these are the children that God graciously given your servant. Verse 6, then the maidens came near with their children, and they bowed down. So again, showing humility before Esau. Leah, verse 7, likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterwards Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. So they were all coming before Esau, and they're bowing before him, showing their humility. Verse 8, and he said, what do you mean by all this company which I have met? And he said, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Notice the word Lord, there's the L's lowercase. That's referring to an earthly Lord, not the Lord God himself. So to find favor in the sight of my Lord, again, he's showing respect to Esau, calling him Lord, as far as a title of respect. Verse 9, but Esau said, I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own. Verse 10, Jacob said, no, please, if now I have found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand, for I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably. So remember, there was a gift to be offered up to Esau, and probably Jacob is realizing that he has been blessed tremendously by God, that he did take the birthright through deceit, and now he wants to share the blessings with Esau. And so he's asking him to please take this. He says, I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you've received me favorably. In other words, you're being merciful to me, even though I did you wrong. And so you're receiving me favorably. Verse 11, please take my gift, which has been brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have plenty. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So there was a gift that was offered to him, and he urged him to take it. Esau didn't want to take it at first. He says, I have plenty. And finally, he gave in and took it. Verse 12, then Esau said, let us take our journey and go, and I will go before you. But he said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks of the herds which are nursing are a care to me. And if they are driven hard one day, all the flock will die. Please let my Lord pass on before his servant, and I will proceed at my leisure according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir. So he's saying, you go ahead. There needs to be some rest for the clan and for everyone. And he says, I don't want to drive the cattle too hard, because I don't want there to be death in the flocks. So verse 15, Esau said, please let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. Verse 16, so Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Verse 17, Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the place is called Succoth. Now, the word Succoth in Hebrew is a word that means booths. So stalls for his animals. So that's how it received its name there. Verse 18, now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and camped before the city. He bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. The Hebrew word for that is a word I can't pronounce. I'm not even going to try. But it's a piece of land that he has purchased. This is the first purchase that Jacob has in the promised land. He purchases some land there. Then he erected there an altar and called it Elohi Israel. And that's what's up here on the board. Elohi Israel, and that means the God of Israel. The God of Israel. So he erected an altar there, and that was the name of that place, Elohi Israel. Now, keep in mind, remember when he was deceiving his father Isaac. Remember what his father said to him concerning how quickly he thought he had gotten an animal to kill. And remember what Jacob said to him when he was younger. He said, the Lord your God provided me an animal. Now, as he has grown spiritually, he's referring to God, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac as the God of Israel. The God of Israel, of course, is the God of Jacob. But before, when he was not quite as spiritually minded as he should have been, he said, well, the Lord your God provided me an animal in my hunt, which of course was a lie. But now as he is progressing, he is growing spiritually, he refers to God as the God of Israel. It's interesting there in verse 18 that we know from other passages that Jacob dug a well there in this area. John chapter 4 verses 5 and 6, Jesus has water drawn by the Samaritan woman from this well. The well, Jacob's well. And it is said that that well can be seen to this day. That is still there. I don't know if it's still being used, but a lot of those ancient wells that were dug by the patriarchs still are in use by the native peoples, even to this very day. So again, what archaeology and what people have found verifies what the Bible has said all along, showing that this is fact. This is not fairy tale. This actually happened. This is historical. Any question or comment about chapter 33? Chapter 33 is what Jacob has been fretting about for a while. He had to get away from Laban because there was trouble there, but he knew if he went back home, he was going to have to face Esau. And as a result of facing Esau and seeing that Esau was favorable towards him, that must have put his mind at ease to a great degree. And now what we're going to find in chapter 34 is something that's pretty bad. In fact, in studying this, you find that in chapter 34, the name of God is not even mentioned. We're going to see how wicked the society was around the people of Israel, the people of Jacob, his clan, and how that they would react to something in a way that they should not have reacted. And it's just a really dark chapter, chapter 34. If you've read that chapter, you know what I'm talking about. Chapter 34 and verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Now, Dinah is the only daughter of Jacob. The only daughter. You have the 12 patriarchs, and then through Leah, one daughter is born. She might have been in her teens by this time. And they're in a very wicked, hostile area. Verse 2. When Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force. Some translations say he humbled her. In other words, he raped her. He took her, was attracted, the attraction turned into lust, the lust turned into rape. That's exactly what happened. Verse 3, he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. Verse 4, so Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this young girl for my wife. Well, he's already taken advantage of her and defiled her by raping her, so he did a terrible thing, but he still wants to marry her. And so he's going to his father and says, get me this girl for my wife. Verse 5. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob kept silent until they came in. Now Jacob, of course, is getting on in years. I have to keep that in mind. The sons were away, the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob were away. Verse 6. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field, and when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. So verse 7 there indicates that in Israel, talking about the clan there, not the nation as a whole, because it didn't develop into a nation until hundreds of years later. But in the clan, this was a terrible thing. They raped their little daughter. Little sister. Jacob's daughter. And so there was a great deal of anger over this. Verse 8, but Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us and give your daughter to us, and take our daughters for yourself. The people of the land, the Canaanites in that area, wanted basically to absorb the clan of Israel. They saw the prosperity that they had. God was blessing them. Livestock. With everything that was going on as far as everything that Jacob was doing, he was being blessed by God. They saw that. They wanted to intermarry with them. Again, the danger of the world trying to engulf God's people. And sometimes that happens through intermarrying. And that was a problem that happened later on in their future, but in Israelite history, of intermarrying with the people. What king had that problem? Solomon. Intermarrying foreign wives. And it had nothing to do with the color of the skin. Had nothing to do with ethnicity. It had to do with religion. Because those foreign wives, because most of those marriages were diplomatic marriages. You married the king's daughter when you made an alliance with the king. You married the king's daughter. And of course the king's daughter wants to bring her gods with her. Well, to make everyone happy and to kind of compromise, you make altars to their gods. And that's exactly what Solomon did. So there again, we see the danger, the temptation is there. Shechem is wanting them, Hamor and Shechem are wanting them to all intermarry together. And when they intermarry together, they're going to have problems. And so even when that intermarriage doesn't even take place at this time, you find out in chapter 35 that Jacob has to tell his own people, get rid of the idols. There's already an influence of the Canaanites within their own clan, the clan of Israel, the family of Israel, of idolatry creeping in. And so if you marry into the world, worldliness will creep into the church. And that happens almost every time. And so verse 10, he goes on trying to get them to intermarry. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it. Verse 11, Shechem also said to her father, to her brothers, if I find favor in your sight, then I will give whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, verse 12, and I will give according as you say to me, but give me the girl in marriage. So here they're asking for this bridal payment, this dowry, so to speak. They want them to intermarry, and of course, the only daughter that he has is Dinah, and so he's trying to marry her, and then trying to get the brothers to intermarry with the rest of them, the females of the people of Shechem, of that area. And so there is a strong will on their part to intermarry with them, and they also, because of they see the prosperity, they want to be blessed because of Jacob's family. Remember why Laban didn't want Jacob to leave? The same reason why Hamor and Shechem here want to intermarry. They see all of those brothers, those workers. They see all the riches and the wealth that Jacob has accumulated. Hey, let's all share this together. They want to share it. They want in a piece of that prosperity, so to speak. Verse 13, but Jacob's sons entered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit. With deceit. Because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. Where do you think they learned to answer with deceit? Handed down to them. Who started that? Abraham. You see, if you're not careful, some of the bad habits that you have, you can pass on to generation, to generation, to generation. Not even intending to. Of course, they knew the history. It would have been spoken to them orally of Abraham's life. Isaac's life and of course, Jacob's life. So they knew all of that. And they said, well, grandfather and great-grandfather, and they all lied. Maybe we can do this and get out of this situation. So, verse 13, they answered them with deceit. They have a plan. They're going to do something. Verse 14. They said to them, here's what the 12 the 12 sons of Israel are saying to them. Verse 14. We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Verse 15, only on this condition will we consent to you, if you will become like us, in that every male of you be circumcised. Verse 16, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. They're taking the sacred act of circumcision that was given to Abraham. That, of course, was passed on from generation to generation. And they're saying to him, here's the deal. If you want us all to live together, all the men in the city have to be circumcised, because it would be a disgrace to us if they were not. They have a reason for saying that. Verse 17, but if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go. Verse 18, now the words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do this thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. He really desired her. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father. Verse 20, so Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of the city. To go to the gate of a city is like in the old days going to the town square. That's where trade took place. That's where messages were proclaimed. And so this is an announcement that's going to be made to the city there. Verse 21. These men are friendly with us, talking about the people of Jacob. Therefore, let them live in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Verse 22, only on this condition will the men consent to us to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Verse 23, will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? You see their motivation? We're going to have a good deal with this. Only let us consent to them, and we will live, and they will live with us. I just can't imagine that this would be a very popular message to all the men of that city. I just can't imagine that was going to be a good deal. I just can't imagine them bursting out in jubilation and joy over this deal. But because they wanted to join forces with them, and they said, and remember how they measured wealth back then, their property and all their animals will be ours, their livestock. This is going to make us wealthier. They were willing to do it. Verse 24. All who went out of the gate in his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. Now, here is why this was done. Here's why this deal was made. Look at verse 25. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. Now, I don't know how big the city was, what the population was. But the deal was all the males in the city had to be circumcised for this covenant of them joining forces with us. Hamor and Shechem are saying, if we want the family, the clan of Israel to be one with us, we've got to give in to this deal. And so they were all circumcised. And as a result of that, on the third day, they were in pain as a result of that surgical procedure. And they took advantage of that. Simeon and Levi took advantage of that. In other words, the men were in no condition to fight. And Simeon and Levi went in there and plundered the place. Now, it was a terrible thing what was done to Dinah. But it did not warrant this type of punishment. It did not warrant all of the males of that city to be killed off. And this is going to carry consequences for Simeon and Levi later on. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Verse 26, they killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. See, Dinah this whole time was like she was held captive. And so they kind of rescued her in this raid. Verse 27, Jacob's son came upon and slain and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city and that which was in the field. Verse 29, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. Verse 30, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, when he heard about what had happened, you have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land and among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household. In other words, he said, we're small in number. There's going to be a retaliation from this, and it's going to be bad for us. Basically, he's asking in verse 30, why have you done this? What have you done? You've added to our trouble. In verse 31, but they said, should he treat our sister as a harlot? Now, of course, the one who done that, Shechem, should have been punished. But this is quite literally an example of overkill in killing off all the males. Right. The people, talking about, I think you're referring to suicide bombers, things of that nature, that they're trying to meet a goal. They have an agenda, and they're willing to kill as many people as they can, including themselves, to meet that agenda, to further their concept of Islam. And as a result of that, it's quite literally an overkill. They're willing to do whatever it takes. And it doesn't matter if they're Americans or Iraqis or whether they're Muslim or of another religion. They'll walk into a place and blow themselves up, men, women, and children, and it's to achieve their goal. And it's a terrible thing, but the only good thing about a suicide bomber is he can only do it once right. Only do it once. And they have to recruit new people to do it. If they do it once right, he won't or she won't ever do it again. And so it's a horrible, horrible situation of retaliation. And instead of going to the person who did that crime against their sister, they wipe out everyone. And of course, this was not God's will at all for them to do this. Remember, Simeon and Levi would have consequences to this. Turn in Genesis to chapter 49. Here you have Jacob. He's on his deathbed. He's blessing all of his sons. Notice what he says in verses 5 through 7. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Verse 7. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So here is the consequences of their actions. It's interesting when you read about that situation. The Simeon's descendants were absorbed into the territory of Judah. You read about this in Joshua chapter 19, verse 1 and verse 9. And when Levi's descendants were dispersed throughout the land, they lived in 48 towns and in the surrounding pasture lands. You read about that in Numbers chapter 35 and verse 2, Joshua chapter 14 and verse 4. So the consequences of Simeon's and Levi's actions carried over to their descendants. That's a lesson in and of itself. That doesn't mean their descendants were guilty of their crime. But actions that families do can have consequences for the descendants. And as a result of doing things that are foolish, or doing things that are contrary to the will of God, the descendants suffer in this life for that. Now, the children are not going to be born with the guilt. Ezekiel chapter 18 makes that very clear. You don't inherit sin. But you can inherit some of the consequences of your ancestors' actions. When you think about it as a whole, as a human race, do we not, as humans, inherit the problems that Adam brought upon the world? Death. We're getting old. There's sickness. There's sin in the world. We're born into a world that's full of sin. We're not born with Adam's sin. We're born innocent. But we're born into a world that has been cursed as a result of Adam's actions. So future generations can be affected by the mistakes and the sins of a few people. And as a result of that, Simeon and Levi's descendants did not really receive any property or land in the promised land. A little bit later on, of course, the descendants of Levi would have a priestly function in Israel. All of the priests would be of the tribe of Levi. And they would function in that capacity. But as far as having an inheritance like the other tribes, they would not have it. And it all goes back to chapter 34 of Genesis. Actions have consequences. You reap what you sow. Positive actions have positive consequences for years down the road. Negative actions have negative consequences. So, if Simeon and Levi would have practiced self-control, Israelite history might have been a little bit different as far as they're concerned. As far as their descendants and their inheritance in the promised land. But because they would not do it, they would not practice self-control, but actually took something that God gave them that was sacred, circumcision, used it in their deceit, and then used it to kill off all of the men of that city and to plunder and loot the city. That's just, it was something that was very wicked. Now, we don't have time to go into chapter 35, but God is going to tell Jacob that he's going to have to go to Bethel. And in verse 2, he's going to tell him to put aside the household, purify themselves, put away all the gods, the foreign gods from among them. I suspect some of those foreign gods they got from Shechem in chapter 34. Remember, they plundered all the city. Some of those gods were elaborately decorated with gold and jewels. And so they're basically told you're going to have to repent and get yourself right. Chapter 35. We'll talk about that more next week, Lord willing.